love North Queensland. I've been here for nearly 40 years now. I love the rainforest, I love the ocean, and it's just a beautiful area to live. Hello, I'm Sharon Smith. I'm the Nursery Supervisor for the Cassowary Coast Regional Council, the Innisfail Nursery, and I've been here for nearly 21 years. My job is a lot to do with growing native trees. We have seed production, we pot on trees on Thursday mornings, and we grow trees for our ratepayers, and we rehabilitate creek banks and riverbanks. Well, I've always liked gardening, so I had the opportunity they wanted a matured age person here for this trainee position, so I applied for it and I was lucky enough to get it at the time. I love working with the volunteers. When we first started 21 years ago, we only had 4 volunteers, and over the years we've grown to between 20 and 30 volunteers that have been coming nearly as long as I've been here. 17, 18 years, and every Thursday morning they all come with morning tea, come along and peel seeds for me, wash pots, weeding and pot on trees. So without their help, there's no way I'd be able to run this nursery on my own 3 days a week. Fantastic, I love the volunteers, very much so. They're like family to me now. We have a tree giveaway between the both council nurseries, Innisfail Nursery and Tully Nursery, that we do around 4 times a year. So each ratepayer will be entitled to 2 trees per person, and it's run over 2 weeks, Thursday and Friday, and they love it. You get to meet some wonderful people in the community, and they're just so happy to walk out with their free trees. And the best one is seeing children walk out with their free tree. They just love it. The smile on their face when they walk out holding their tree to go home with, and that's the best part of the job, because you're teaching young ones, grow your trees for your birds and your butterflies. My favourite time to spend away, I love, my partner and I go down to Cardwell. After Cyclone Yassi, we've been going down supporting the community of Cardwell, and they have great coffee, great cafes, fantastic seafood, and to look out over Hinchinbrook and just have a cold beer and eat prawns is beautiful. It is so relaxing, just all your stresses go away, and it's just the best.
Fellow councillors, staff and residents viewing via live stream, good morning all and welcome. I acknowledge the traditional owners, past, present and emerging. Do we have any apologies? I'll take that as a no. Move on to the declaration. Councillors and staff, please use this opportunity to make public any material personal interests and or conflicts of interest, real or perceived, in respect of the items in the agenda. Councillors should use this opportunity to disclose and or comment on any other councillor or staff interest in accordance with the Act and regulations. Any declarations, councillors? I'll take that as a no. Okay, we move on now to item 1.1, the CCRC Operational Plan 2021, and I'll hand over to Ms Kerr.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I present to you today Council's Operational Plan for 2021. The annual operational plan is based on Council's corporate plan and includes activities required to achieve the corporate plan strategies. The corporate plan has undergone an annual review with no proposed changes for the 2021 year. The operational plan highlights the individual activities and responsibilities for the nominated activities Council wishes to achieve for the financial year. I present to you for adoption no changes to the corporate plan and to adopt the annual operational plan for 2021.
Thank you, Ms Kerr. The recommendation reads that Council note there have been no changes to the corporate plan 2017 to 2022 and adopt the annual operational plan for 2021. Somebody move that, please. Moved by Councillor Farinelli, seconded by Councillor Baines. All in favour? It's carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Kerr. I'll now move on to the Mayor's address. Fellow councillors, 2021 has presented us with challenges unlike anything we have experienced before. Right across our region, we know people are doing it tough. We know there are households struggling with unemployment or declining revenue from a family business. And we know that recovery from this struggle won't be immediate. But we also know it's not just residents and businesses doing it tough. Our community groups have had their opportunities to raise revenue slashed. Given the current economic climate, a priority for this council is to be careful with our spending, to look for opportunities where savings can be made, and to deliver a budget that is achievable and fair to the community. We haven't shied away from the tough calls that needed to be made, but at every step of developing this budget, we have put the community first. It is a caring and compassionate budget, and despite its challenges, this budget will help lay the foundations for our economic recovery. Councillors, the budget I present today continues to offer residents with the lowest general rate increase in 12 years. It maintains our debt-free status 4 years running. It demonstrates 1.78 million in savings to ratepayers. It provides 463 reduced or unchanged fees and charges. It focuses on economic activation. It invests in our region, our community, and our future. This budget is designed to provide relief where it counts, to target relief measures to ensure those who need it most receive it. We will support our households who are doing it tough. We will support local clubs and sporting groups. We will back our hard-working business owners. Councillors, this budget has left no stone unturned in ensuring every dollar is spent wisely and has been carefully prepared with community needs at the forefront. Councillors, I am proud to say that today I present to you a budget designed to put the community first. I submit the budget for your consideration. We now hand over to the CEO, item 3.1, the CEO's budget report.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, at first, please allow me to thank you, the councillors and the staff for the countless hours of effort and the significant intelligence that's been injected into the preparation of the draft budget, which is before you for consideration today. It's been no easy task in an environment of a global pandemic and a national recession. Mr Mayor, the Cassowary Coast Regional Council budget for the 2020-2021 financial year has improved on recent years and now reflects and incorporates projects from Council's asset management plans. The budget includes savings factored through asset rationalisation and ongoing service level reviews with the assistance of a services catalogue. Budget includes various operational and capital initiatives, including but not limited to continued tourism support, review of our caravan park operations, review of the Clump Point facility management, traffic management designs, completion of 2019 natural disaster road damage funded through the disaster recovery funding arrangements, which is a joint Commonwealth and state initiative, and excuse me, and critical projects associated with water sustainability, which would enable Council to address boiled water alerts and meet Queensland health-based targets. The budget provides for a total operating revenue of $82.13 million and operating expenses of $82.12 million, providing a small surplus of $9,000. Clearly, we've strongly avoided trying to produce a deficit budget, Mr Mayor. Additional highlights include general rates having seen a modest increase of 1.23% in order to cover operational expenses for the year, after adjustments as a result of land valuation movements and a reduction in general rate discount percentage from 15% to 10%. The utility charges for the southern scheme have increased more as a result of price realignment to ensure single water pricing for all schemes. No change has been made to sewerage prices whatsoever. The budget includes COVID-19 related initiatives associated with general rates, sewerage and fees and charges of around $400,000 to assist ratepayers and the community for the first rating period, the discount period will be extended from the usual 30 days to 60 days. Mr Mayor, fees and charges have been reviewed in detail, resulting in reductions or no charges to some 463 fees, as you mentioned previously. And additionally, COVID-19 related discounts have been factored into the budget. Grants and contributions have increased due to an expected increase in the federal assistance grant and the disaster recovery funding arrangements, the DRFA, which I mentioned a moment ago. relating to the 2019 disaster. There's been an offset by way of a reduction in the planning section related to operational grants. Other revenue sources have increased due to a reduction. Other revenue sources have decreased, rather, due to a reduction in interest on investments from reduced interest rates and the expected impact of COVID-19 on Council's operations. Employee expenses have reduced, reflecting Council's recently adopted new organisational structure, with anticipated savings of around $1 million factored into the budget, despite an increase in wages relating to the enterprise bargaining agreement. Materials and services have increased in comparison to last financial year due to DRFA expenditure, offset of course by increased revenue, and waste management contract payments. Offsetting these increases is a reduction in electricity expenditure due to the solar installation initiatives which have been provided to various council facilities. Operational expenditure savings of $275,000 have been factored in to ensure Council continues to explore and take advantage of innovation and efficiency resulting from service reviews and improved planning and scheduling, as well as undertaking asset rationalisation of Council's significant asset base. Depreciation has remained steady. The updated asset management plans have identified a number of initiatives and improvement plans resulting in improved data and reduction in cost of various assets. The budget includes a savings target of $400,000 for asset rationalisation. Capital budget includes a works program of $36.6 million. The program allows for the completion of outstanding capital works from the 19-20 financial year, anticipated at $20 million. Final details of the carryover will of course be determined after the end of the financial year, and that information will be provided to Council. A capital budget includes a works program of $36.6 million and a summary of the capital works program, excluding carryover works, includes infrastructure and delivery services in the sum of $27.75 million, Office of the Chief Executive Officer $1.38 million, water $5.16 million, sewerage $2.03 million, waste management $280,000. The budget papers, Mr Mayor, include the planned capital projects for the next 3 years, and details of the projects are included in Appendix H and I of the budget papers. So in summary, Mr Mayor, the development of the budget has continued to follow the trend of recent years, however with additional complexities which we've not previously seen. In addition to the usual economic and financial strategies, as I mentioned previously, we've had the challenge of the pandemic and the recession. Budget seeks to strike an appropriate balance between maintaining Council's sound financial position whilst not placing too heavy a burden on ratepayers through substantial rate increases. The impact on the projected long-term financial position is also an important consideration and appears entirely sustainable. Council has endeavoured to balance financial challenges and its long-term financial sustainability and stability appear sound. Mr Mayor, it's my recommendation that you seek to have my report received.
Thank you, Mr Gott. Councillors, any question for the CEO on his budget report? I'll take that as a no. Would somebody move the recommendation that the Chief Executive Officer's report on the 2021 budget be received by Council? Moved by Councillor Barnes, seconded by Councillor Baines. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We move on to item 3.2, the Significant Differences Report, and this will be delivered by the Financial Officer, Mr Singh.
Good morning all.
Morning.
Again, following on from James's comment earlier, I just wanted to thank you all for your time and effort you've put in, and also the staff, particularly Leah and the management accounting team, and also a lot of the effort has gone through across the organisation. So I just wanted to acknowledge the effort put in by everyone. So it's just a combined team effort. So thank you everyone for your effort this morning. Councillors, the report that I'm presenting this morning is on our explanation of our significant differences. So normally what we do is, going into the budget, we try and forecast what our end of year results would be, and for our 10-year modelling and for the modelling for the budget purposes, we normally use the estimated figures. So in terms of the report itself, councillors, so on page 13 we have the executive summary. I'll just flip on to page 14. So page 14 is a table which has our fully amended budget and also the estimated end of year figures. And along that, we have a number of note references. So what I'll do this morning is go through some of those note references just to highlight where some of the key significant differences have come from. So the first one, councillors, on page 14, table A, item number 1 refers to our fees and charges. So council has seen approximately a 6.5% reduction in our camping and hire fees, and this has been impacted mainly because of the council facilities being closed due to the pandemic, and also there has been some impacts on our lease arrangements, particularly for our caravan park. So what we are forecasting at the end of the year is going to be a slight reduction in revenue, so from $2.65 million down to around $2.5 million. In terms of item number 2, councillors, so interest, as mentioned previously by Mr. Gott. So in terms of interest, we have seen a trend in the market, and the market trend has been a reduction in interest over the last couple of months. And at the moment, the RBA rates are sitting at around 0.25%. Generally, when we build our budget, we make an assumption, and a few assumptions are used to come up with an estimate. And unfortunately, due to the current economic conditions and also looking at the cash flow being held by council, what we are forecasting is a slight reduction in our end of year estimate from our adopted budget. And the figure we are anticipating at this stage is around $172,000. So a flow-on effect from that, councillors, what you'll see is we have made some changes to our investment policy that we'll go through later in the budget. Item 3 normally relates to our sales and recoverable walks. Councillors, we have tried, this is an area we have tried to increase, and what we are seeing is actually a slight delay in terms of invoicing is what we are anticipating at the time of preparation of the budget, but our continued effort is into increasing that revenue, not reducing it, and in the coming days we will be coming back to council with a few more options in that space. I'll just move to item 6. Item 6 is one of the biggest ticket items for us. Obviously, it's depreciation. As you're all aware, council has a fairly substantial asset base, and as part of that, depreciation is something that we have tried to manage over the last couple of years. And through the efforts of the asset engineering team, we have now AMPs. The challenge we have for this year, we have indexation that has been factored in some of our asset classes, and the indexation has indicated increases in some of the valuation of some of our assets. We are hoping to counter that off by the revaluation movement through water and sewage, but unfortunately at this point in time we are forecasting an increase in depreciation of around $513,000. I'll just flag, this is not the final figure though. We are still looking at our valuation figures for water and sewage, so there might be some changes coming out of that. In terms of capital grants and subsidies, councillors, capital grants and subsidies, we have factored in the budget a lot of the DRFA funding, and our capital budget as it stands currently sits close to around $70 million, a bit more. What we are forecasting is we will still get revenue, but it won't be coming in this year. So there is anticipated revenue that will come into next year. So when we did the initial budget build, we were anticipating around $25 million to come in this year, but what we are likely to see is some of that money will come in now next year. So in terms of our operational budget, we are forecasting a deficit of around $600,000. Again, that would be subject to audit and also the valuation and end of year adjustments. And in terms of our net result, we are forecasting a surplus of around $4.6 million at this point in time. Councillors, there's a minor correction on the report. So at the bottom of page 15, I think there's a comment which refers to COVID-19 instead of COVID-194. So there's a typo. So if you could note that minor change. Is there any questions, councillors?
Any questions for Mr. Singh, councillors? If not, could somebody please move the recommendation that the significant difference report be accepted? Councillor Baines, seconded by Councillor Chewy. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Move on to item 3.3, the revenue policy. Mr. Singh.
So, councillors, now we're going into the policies associated with the budget for 2021. The first one of the rank is the revenue policy. In terms of the policy itself, We're not proposing any major changes from the policy that was presented last year. The purpose of the policy, again, is to allow council to make and levy rates and charges. It exercises its power to grant rebates and concessions. It also provides guidance around recovery of unpaid amounts of rates and charges, and it also provides us guidance around cost recovery. So there's a number of principles that are covered in this policy. Instead of going through each one of them, I'll just leave it to that, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to take questions.
Any questions for Mr Singh on the revenue policy? Take that as a no. Somebody move that recommendation, please. Moved by Councillor Millwood, seconded by Councillor Pervin. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Move on to item 3.4, the revenue statement.
Councillors, the revenue statement, it outlines and explains the revenue raising measures adopted by council in terms of preparation of the budget for 2021. It is a legislative requirement, and also the revenue statement that council has in the past adopted is based on a differential rating category. So in terms of what we have for this financial year, we are proposing no changes to the actual categories. So council will still maintain the 22 rating categories, and this is in line with the rating reference group recommendations. What we have done though, and I will draw your attention to page 10 and page 11. So what we have done this financial year, we have seen the changes of the recommendation of the rating reference group. So we have tried implementing a number of those recommendations, and also one of the things that has impacted council this year heavily has been the valuation movements. So what we have tried as part of our modelling is to moderate the impact on some of the ratepayers. And as part of that, we have made some changes to the residential rating category, particularly around the dollar threshold. So, for example, if we look at the residential category 1, we have now a dollar value of $70,000 or less. Previously, that used to be $75,000. The second one used to be between $75,000 and up to $199,000, 999 cents. Sorry, 119,999. What we have done is, again, that's aligned to the category 1, which is now up to $70,000. There has been a slight change to category 3, residential category, where we have reduced from 174,999 to 159,999, and then also 4 and 5 that has been changed. So previously the highest capping amount was 299,999. Now that figure is 279,999, which is less than $300,000. The reason why we have done that, so part of that is when we did our modelling, we have tried to moderate the impact on some of these ratepayers to spread it across, potentially to restrict the impact of the valuation movements and reduce the burden on some of these ratepayers in that category. Councillors, also what you will see is we have for this financial year reduced our discount rate, and that's something that Mr. CEO had mentioned before. So our discounts have been reduced from 15% to 10%, and that is something that has been a recommendation from the rating reference group. And what we have done is moderated the rate in the dollar after the valuation movements, and then also tried passing on the 5% discount onto the rate on the dollar. So what has resulted in that case is there's a number of rate in the dollars that has reduced, and some has gone up. So that there has been some changes in the rate in the dollar. So you will see a fluctuation if somebody compares it to last year, and the reason being 1 being the valuation movement, 2 being the reduction in the discounts, and 3 there has been some further recommendation that has come out of the rating reference group that council has implemented this year. So I think that's the important thing to acknowledge, that if we start comparing last year's and this year's, there's a lot of variables that has come in place, and what council has done is actually once we have moderated the valuation movement and factored in the discount adjustments, and then council has gone in to balance the budget by a modest rate increase of 1.23%. So that is what has happened. But as we move on, so we move on to page 28, item number 4. Council has levied a transport levy and an environmental management levy. So this year, again, we are going to continue. There has been a slight increase in the transport levy by $2, and the environment management levy has gone up by $4. In terms of special charges, the special charges mainly that is in the revenue statement relates to the rural fire brigades mainly, and also moving on from there, on page 14 we have the water excess charge. So there has been a slight increase in excess charge, which is mainly based on council's cost index. And when we go to page 6.2, what council has done this year, so going back a couple of years, council started a journey. So the journey was to bring the prices for the two water schemes to one and merge it into one. So what we have done is this year, council has actually gone ahead and merged the water pricing across the region to be same. That is in recognition of council spending around $16.4 million over the last couple of years, particularly on reservoirs, bores and intakes. And if we look at the investment, bulk of that investment, roughly around $12 million has gone into the southern scheme. And what we'll see in the next couple of months is actually a completion of our Bulgan Creek reservoir. And also we have completed our Whitley Hill reservoir. So potentially going forward, as in the budget, what you'll see is in our capital plan for the next couple of years, we are going to invest in a reservoir in Tully, which would be the Hyde Street reservoir. So I think what is important is actually acknowledge the level of investment that has gone into water in the last couple of years, and going forward there is going to be continued investment. So the intent is to meet the water quality targets set by the Queensland government, and also just to make sure that we are sustainable going forward. So that's where we have aligned the prices, and also the marginal water rate has been adjusted to be aligned for the two schemes. Council is just moving on. In terms of the sewage and trade waste charges on page 16, there has been no changes to sewage charges this year, so we have left sewage charges as is. There are certain additional initiatives that has been designed as part of the COVID-19 relief that we'll go through later on as part of our COVID relief package that has been factored in the budget to reduce the burden on the ratepayers, particularly around the second pedestal charges. In terms of the other charges from there on page 34, 35, and 36, there have been minor changes, and a lot of these changes are aligned to our cost index. In terms of page 21, councillors, I just wanted to draw your attention to item 9.2. So item 9.2 actually relates to the payment of rates and charges, and what we're proposing under 9.2 and 9.3 is that for the first rating period, that the due date for the rates be extended out by 60 days rather than 30 days. So normally giving our ratepayers more time to pay, which means that they'll enjoy the benefit of the discounts going for additional 30 days. And for the second rating period, which would be in January next year, that rating period we revert back to 30 days. If the situation does change due to COVID-19, if it does complicate, then council might wish to come back and revisit that. So at this point in time, based on the current situation, what we are proposing is additional 60 days. And at the same time, in line with the rating reference group recommendation, we have reduced our discount rate from 15% to 10%. And what is important to acknowledge in that space is actually when making the decision, we have taken into consideration a lot of our ratepayers who are actually not able to pay us on time. What the reduction does in us passing back the reduction through the rate in the dollar would actually see some of the gross amounts being lower than the previous year. So in the past, if your rate was $3,000, what you may see this year, if you weren't able to enjoy the benefits of a discount, you might see a slightly lesser gross value for your rate, which might be $2,999 or something like that. So that is designed to minimize the burden on our community, especially the ratepayers that are not able to pay us on time. So that's going to help them through discount adjustments. On page 38, councillors, so 9.4 talks about interest on overdue rates and charges. The figure that we are using for this financial year is actually aligned to the Reserve Bank yield rates. So at the moment, the bank yield rates are sitting at 0.53%, plus 8% is what has been included in the regulation. So what council is adopting today would be a figure of 8.53%, and this is a reduction from 9.73% compared to last year. Again, a reflection of where the interest rates are in the market. Councillors, from there on, the next items talks about the rate concessions and also the refund of rates and charges and payments. Councillors, is there any question?
Any questions for Mr Singh, councillors? I'd just like to make a comment. It's all the way through your report. There was a connection with the community via the rate referencing group. So, you know, we are listening to the community when we frame our budget. There was a rate referencing group formed in 2009, straight after the amalgamation, and all those recommendations were adopted by councils following. How many of the current rate referencing group's recommendations are left to be implemented by this council?
Councillor, we have tried actioning most of them. The couple that are left are the ones that we are doing gradually. I'd probably say around 3 are left, but that's something that we won't be able to do one shot because there's going to be a major impact on the rate base.
Thanks, Mr Singh. If there's no questions, councillors, would somebody move that the revenue statement be adopted? Moved by Councillor Farinelli, seconded by Councillor Millwood. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We move on to item 3.5, interest on overdue rates and charges.
Councillors, just item 5, there is no specific report for it, so it's part of our revenue statement. Under the regulations, we are required to have a separate resolution for that, so I'll just highlight again, as I mentioned before, the overdue rates and charges that we are going to adopt this year is 8.53, which is a slight reduction from last year, which was 9.73, and again, this is purely through the regs in the Reserve Bank yield rate. That is pretty much what that one is, Mr Mayor.
Any questions for Mr Singh on the interest on overdue rates and charges? Councillor Farinelli, you're moving it. Councillor Farinelli moves, seconded by Councillor Chewy. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 3.6, the rating concessions policy.
The councillors, the rating concession policy, there's a couple of objectives that we try and achieve out of this policy. So again, trying to provide transparency and equity in relation to all eligible pensioners through a council rates remission scheme, and then also this also provides the staff guidance around a reduction in water consumption charge if there is a genuine leak on a property. And council, this also allows us to establish a provision of rates based on financial assistance for community organisations, not-for-profit community recreation and sporting organisations. The policy itself also allows customers to have a mechanism around water consumption that are due to home dialysis machines, whereby we provide some assistance for that. And then also the policy itself is going to operate in line with the COVID-19 financial hardship policy. So what we have in front of us, we haven't proposed any major changes to this policy compared to last year, and we are still maintaining our concession for pensioners, which are set at 50% remission of the general rates or a maximum figure of $300. So there has been no changes proposed to that figure. And in terms of our table on page 52, the table on page 52 provides a guidance to the staff and also councillors around the different categories and what rating concessions are being provided. So there has been no changes proposed to that from last year. So we are maintaining our commitment to the community in terms of some of these areas where we still feel that there is a need for us to continue to provide them assistance, particularly now in this COVID-19 situation. And also, just the last bit that we have added onto the policy, councillors, so it's on page 54. There's a reference to our COVID-19 policy. So that sort of sums up this particular policy, councillors, unless there's any questions.
Any questions for Mr Singh on that particular report? I'd just like to make a comment about Cassowary Coast Regional Council when benchmarked against neighbouring shires. We do offer a 10% discount. A lot of our neighbouring shires don't offer that, and our pensioner concession policy equates to about $750,000 back to the aged population. So when people ask, where do our rates go, there's a clear example. We offer 10% discount on rates paid on time, and we offer pensioners up to $750,000 in a concession policy. I see that as very generous social justice policies, and I'm proud to say that I've always supported both. Any questions for Mr Singh? If not, would somebody move that the rating concession policy be adopted. Moved by Councillor Pervin, seconded by Councillor Barnes. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. I'll move on to item 3.7, the investment policy.
Councillors, as I mentioned before, so the investment policy provides a mechanism for staff to undertake investment across different organisations. So in terms of the policy itself, the policy takes into consideration our risk philosophy and also some of the prudent processes that we follow, and also limits our investment in certain categories. So I just wanted to draw your attention to page 59. So page 59 has a table. So table A is our credit risk guidelines. So it sort of, what it does is actually indicates and sets the guideline for the staff. So when you look at the first two columns, it talks about long-term credit ratings and also the short-term credit ratings. And in the past, what we have tried doing is a lot of our investment has been sitting with QDC generally because of the easy nature of us putting money in and withdrawing it. So there's only a short turnaround required for that. And also we have in the past benefited from a pretty good rate that has always been offered by QDC. So in our previous policy, what we had was a minimum of total investment. We're going to be restricted to around $10 million with QDC. But what has happened in the coming days is actually the QDC rates has actually dropped below our existing financial institution that we use, and we have a banking contract with them whereby we actually are getting more money through them rather than QDC. So what we are proposing under this policy is that we change the minimum amount invested with QDC to be 0%. So we'll just look at the rates. When the QDC rates go up, we invest with them. When it doesn't, we just revert back to our commercial bank. And then also what we have seen in the market lately is when we look at the long-term credit ratings, so a lot of the AAA, AA, and A plus and A commercial or financial institutions are actually offering good rates, and depending on when we actually source codes from them. So what we are saying is purely from a risk point of view, if we look at AAA and AA, so these are your NABs, your Westpacs and ANZ and Commonwealth banks. So from a risk point of view, there's very minimum risk involved with these organizations. So what we're saying is, apart from investing with QDC, we also do 100% with these guys, whereby if we get good rates, we go with them. And it's all about maximizing our investment and also reducing our risk. But in terms of some of the other financial institutions, so we look at the BBB plus ratings and BBB minus. Again, we continue to invest with them if the opportunity does exist, but what we are proposing is that we reduce the limit that we invest with them to 25%, 50%, and manage that risk through that, whereby we might have some restrictions. And I think you might recall what we did last month was actually we have now invested with AMP, and again that's designed to maximize our return on investment. So councillors, so the major change to that particular policy is just the table A at this point in time.
Thanks, Mr. Singh. Any questions for the officer? If not, I would ask somebody to move that recommendation. Moved by Councillor Chewy, seconded by Councillor Millwood. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Move on to item 3.8, the debt policy.
So councillors, our debt policy is something that we have updated going back 2 years ago, and one of the things or one of the changes we made at that point in time was bring in item 3.2, which is on page 63. It talks about internal loans, and the whole idea was instead of us going and borrowing from QDC and paying a fairly high rate, we maximize our own cash flow and do internally. But what we have seen is since we have moved into our space of AMPs, which is our asset management plans, what we are starting to do now is actually do our capital plans over the next 3 to 5 years mainly. What it allows us to do is actually look at our capital projects that we are lining up, and the intent is to line our capital projects in a way whereby we are going out and sourcing funding from external bodies, mainly federal and the state government. So what it does is then it reduces our need to borrow, and what you have seen in this policy at the end of the policy, as it currently stands, there is no debt, and in our long-term financial plans, what we have noted there is no capital project that we are intending to do where we are anticipating to go out and borrow. So So that's the plan at this stage. But again, once we review our asset management plans, that plan may change. But in the meantime, we are proposing no changes to this existing policy, councillors.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Any questions for the officer? If not, would somebody move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Pervin, seconded by Councillor Millwood. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We move on to item 3.9, the COVID-19 financial relief package and the COVID-19 financial hardship policy.
So, councillors, just on this, I just wanted to start off with when we, and as you all would recall, when we started building our budget, we were in a deficit of negative 6.5 million is the figure we started off with. So the challenge has been looking for savings, and at the end of the day also come up with something that we can target to different areas within the community, and which is where the need is. So as we have gone through the budget process, obviously through savings and other initiatives and through making some hard decisions, particularly one of them was around the structure and trying to pick up that savings. So what all of that has allowed us to do is actually come up with a package, and the package that we have in terms of monetary value, I think it works out to be around $400,000. So this is the additional package, which is what we might call a second package to the first one that we put up around May. And in this package, what we have identified through our own discussions internally, and also relying on the economic recovery group, and also through the knowledge that councillors has come in with, especially the new councillors, and also the knowledge that the staff have. And we have also looked at a number of external factors as well in terms of some of the stimuluses and some of the initiatives that are being put on the table by the feds and the state. So we have recognized all that and acknowledged all that, and also taken into consideration council's existing outstanding debts, and looked at all that just to give us a bit of guidance around where the need is. So based on that, what we have come up with is actually, if I itemize it, 11 different initiatives. So the first one, Note 1, relates to the Visitor Information Centre annual membership. So what we're saying is for the new financial year that we waive off the fee that is being paid for the VIC annual membership. So that's what we're proposing under Note 1. Note 2, in terms of the green waste mulch loading fee, so one of the things we have seen is, as part of the COVID, obviously a lot of the people are working from home and doing more at home, so which means just to encourage more people to pick up mulch from our different waste facilities, so we have made the loading fee for mulch free for the next financial year as well. In terms of Note 3, councillors, Note 3 relates to our pedestal charges with reference to the policy. So what I might draw your attention to is actually the hardship policy, and I'll draw your attention to page 74 of the policy, councillors. So on page 74, what we have said is, in terms of the sewerage pedestal charges, that council provide some form of concession, and the concession be targeted to the different categories, and I'd like to draw your attention to the different categories. So category 1 being land use 48, which is our sports club and facilities, land use 50, which are our other clubs. What we're proposing as part of the COVID-19 relief package is that for the second pedestal charge, we waive off 100% of that for that particular category for the first rating period. So again, it's important that it's for the first rating period. In terms of category 2, which is our business owner occupier, where the primary land use is 42, which is hotels and taverns, 43, which is motels, 47, which is licensed club, and 49, which is caravan park. So what we are acknowledging is a lot of these businesses were either not operating to full capacity or were mainly closed during the COVID-19 session. So what we're proposing is that for the rating period between July and December, that we pass on 50% concession to these 4 different land use categories. And the last one is category 3, which relates to land use category 7, guest house and private hotels. There were some that were operating, but some that were probably not operating to full capacity. So what we are saying is, for the second pedestal charge, that we waive off 25% for the first rating period. So that again is something that we have cleverly looked at, and we also acknowledge the fact there might be others that are more heavily impacted than what we think. So there's no perfect answer for this. But what we've tried doing is capturing core of the areas where we think there is a need to provide some additional assistance, and we are providing it through our second pedestal chart. So that's the addition to the actual policy itself. And then if we go back to page 66, councillors, so just going back to note 4. So note 4 relates to annual and seasonal charge. So what we're saying is for some of the sporting and community groups, in terms of they're being impacted by restrictions on the activities, what we're saying is that we provide a 50% discount on the annual and seasonal fee for 6 months. So that's note 4. In terms of note 5, commercial and residential activities and permits, again, what we're saying is we provide 50% discount on their fee. Council's note 6 talks about food licenses. So again, acknowledging the fact that not all restaurants were running to capacity, and there was few that were impacted by the restrictions of travel. So what we're saying is for the 2021 year, that we provide a 50% discount on all food licenses for 2021. Note 7 relates to a liquid waste contractor permit fee. So again, we are recommending that we propose a 50% discount on that. Prescribed annual activities, annual permits, again a 50% discount on that. And in terms of occasionally, we do have customers who come in and there's a need for them to withdraw some money from their excess rates that they have paid, or there have been some errors that they have made while doing a transfer. So what we're saying is we waive off any charges on that up to 31st of December. And note 10 is actually recognition of us increasing the discount period from 30 days to 60 days, just to give everyone an additional 30 days to pay without incurring any additional charge. And that discount period covers for that additional 30 days. Council's note 11 is us pretty much council adopting a financial hardship policy. So I just wanted to again highlight we have the existing hardship policy that has been adopted by council previously. This revised policy has got additional concessions, particularly around sewerage, that we are trying to pass on to our customers. So in terms of the recommendation, council, so there's 3 recommendations. So the first one is that council approves the following changes to our adopted fees and charges, which I have mentioned before. Recommendation 2 is that council adopt the revised financial hardship policy, and note additional sewerage related concessions are available for business owner occupiers, which is covered in the section 5 of the policy. And again, council note the increase in the discount period from 30 days to 60 days for the first rating period. So that's the recommendation, councillors.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Any questions for the officer on that report? Councillor Barnes.
Baines. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Singh, you mentioned that with the extra pedestal charges, that we've tried to capture what we imagine would be a majority of the applications that may come in. But is there scope for someone who believes they may fit into a category to come to council and present a case?
The councillors, through the chair, councillors, in this particular case, because we are restricting into those categories, we might not be able to consider that. But what council does encourage is if there are businesses or individuals that are struggling to pay their rates, that they write to council, and council under the regulations is able to look at extreme hardship situations, and there is a provision in the regulation that allows for that, so they should be able to use that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and probably just a final comment, just to congratulate the staff on the works they've done in this space. I think it's very compassionate provisions that have been brought forward, and working with the councillors and the staff, it's a fantastic outcome.
Yeah, I concur. Getting elected and sworn in very late because of the tight ballot and the counter preferences, we were confronted with the budget like all councils, but COVID-19 has certainly dished up further challenges, and our staff have done a terrific job looking after our community in making sure that there's going to be hardship policies in place to assist. No other council in Australia have been through these sorts of circumstances. We're all confronted by this challenge of COVID-19, and it's great that we've got staff who are caring and compassionate and we're able to put this package together. Would somebody move that the officer's recommendation, moved by Councillor Farinelli, seconded by Councillor Pervin, all in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Move on to item 3.10, the rates recovery policy.
So, councillors, the rate recovery policy actually ensures effective and timely recovery of outstanding rates and charges, and we haven't made any major changes to this policy, apart from some of the things that we have discussed previously. One of the things that we did identify while putting a financial hardship policy and a package together was actually council has in its current rate recovery policy a number of different mechanisms that people can take advantage of, and some of these have been included by other councils as part of their COVID-19 relief package, whereas for us it has always been in the rates recovery policy. So, for example, we are still continuing with our formal arrangements, we are still continuing with our general arrangements and informal arrangements and short-term arrangements. So generally, I think one of the key things to highlight though is if ratepayers are genuinely in a situation where they are struggling, I think one of the things that is important for them is actually to get into a formal arrangement, and then once they get into a formal arrangement, there is no interest charge for the duration of the agreed arrangement. So I think that's an important bit, because sometimes what can happen is the ratepayers probably leave it a bit too late. So I think it is important that if they are a bit more proactive and come forward and get into a formal arrangement, that may actually help. And also, in terms of, we haven't made any changes in terms of our recovery action, and council during the COVID-19 actually had put a hold on all external recovery, and going into the next cycle, what we are going to do is actually look at every case on a case-by-case basis, and acknowledging that there are situations where we have to take action, but then also there are situations where we have to be compassionate. But in terms of the actual rates recovery policy, councillors, there hasn't been any major changes to this, and we are actually trying to encourage our staff, our customers to sign up with direct credits and also get into payment arrangements prior to them getting rates, so that actually allows them to make smaller payments, so that when it comes to the actual rate, they don't have to pay big sums. So that is something that is already in play, and we would probably encourage all of them to do similar. So again, but in terms of the policy, again, councillors, no changes from our end, and happy to take questions.
Any questions for Mr Singh on that policy? If not, would somebody move the recommendation that the rates recovery policy be adopted? Moved by Councillor Barnes, seconded by Councillor Chewy. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Move on to item 3.11, the sundry debt policy.
Councillors, the sundry debt sort of sits outside of our rates mechanism, but what we have done now is the sundry debt area collection actually sits within the rates team. In terms of the policy itself, councillors, so the mechanism is similar to what we do for our rates recovery. We do send out reminder letters, and we do encourage people to get into payment arrangements. There is no interest on debt outstanding, so there is no interest again. But in terms of, there are a number of different areas where we get into payment arrangements. So particularly, if it's a waste-related customer, then we may issue a stop credit for them. There are measures that are highlighted on page 83 under 4.3.2. But in terms of the actual criteria, a lot of the work is done within the rates area through the approval of the manager of finance. And normally what we do is we do have quarterly reports that come back to council, and if there's any risk with any of the customers, that get highlighted through to council, and potentially under the existing policy, what we have is the CEO has a delegation to write off around $10,000 worth of bad debts, and the CFO around $5,000. But generally, what we have seen in the last 2 years, we haven't had to get into that situation. And generally what we try and do is any debt outstanding of a significant figure are generally discussed with council. So it's not a case of the CEO or myself going in and write off debt. I think we make sure there is a transparent process that we generally follow and it's well documented. So, councillors, apart from that, I don't have anything else to highlight with this particular policy. So happy to take questions.
Councillors, any questions for Mr Singh? If not, would somebody move the recommendation that the policy be adopted? Moved by Councillor Millwood, seconded by Councillor Pervin. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Move on to item 3.12, activate Cassowary Coast Development Incentive Policy.
So, councillors, going back to last financial year, we looked at a number of planning initiatives. Some of them are still in play. Some have finished. So, what this particular policy actually relates to is a reduction in pedestal charges. So, one of the things we identified was that our our sewerage charges were quite high when you start benchmarking our charges, and what we have done over the last 2 years is tried moderating it by actually not increasing and passing back some of the savings. But what this policy is actually designed to do is allow a reduction in additional pedestal charges for over a period of 24 months for new development. And one of the key milestones for that is that it needs to commence within 2 years after council has made a decision on it. And the way it's designed to work is under table 3.2, if the number of pedestal charges for new developments is greater than 10 and less than 25, then we provide 50% discount on or reduction on additional charge, and if it's greater than 25, then we provide 70% reduction in additional pedestal charge. And this was again in recognition of us trying to stimulate and get more activation in the area. So what we're proposing is that we haven't made any changes to this policy, but council again adopt this policy for another year. And part of the measure that we are going to look at is in the coming weeks is we'll bring back some of the other development incentives that we feel that council should continue with as well, so to make sure that we are seen as a council that still encourages development and wants to grow and encourages activation in the economy. And this policy actually designed to support that. Happy to take questions, councillors.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Any questions, councillors, for the officer? Moved by Councillor Farinelli, seconded by Councillor Pervin. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Move on to item 3.13, the Trade Waste Environmental Management Plan.
So, councillors, just going to the Trade Waste Environmental Plan, I had left a few things here for councillors to make sure that they were reading this particular document, and I've given Councillor Baines a 10 out of 10. He's obviously come back with a few things that I've left there for him to pick up. So, just on page 92, just the title on that report, it should be Trade Waste Environmental. The spelling, the G needs to be replaced with V. That's a minor change on that page. And councillors also, just as I'm going through that, on page 104, there's another small thing that I left in there for him or for the councillors to pick up, and that was actually on under item 12, trade waste fees and charges, 12.1 general, the second paragraph, it reads, the trade waste approval annual excess charge will be levied pro rate. It should be pro rata, so that's a minor change to that, councillors. And thank you, Councillor Baines, for picking it up.
If I may, Mr Chair, thank you, Mr Singh, for the challenge, and I will guarantee that I'll always raise to the challenge and become evident that I actually read the documents you're putting through. So, thank you, Mr Singh.
So, councillors, just going back to the purpose. So, the purpose of this plan is to set a consistent framework on how council manages trade waste discharge and meets its obligation under legislation and license. So, councillors, look, I won't go through the level of detail that sits in this policy or in this trade plan. And again, the expertise of Mr. Jeffrey Smart has gone through all this, and it is a mechanism that allows us to charge, particularly when it comes to trade waste. So for this financial year or the coming financial year, we actually haven't proposed any changes to any of the figures. So most of these are the same. So what we're proposing is that council adopt the Trade Waste Environmental Management Plan.
Any questions for Mr Singh on this particular report? If not, would somebody move that the Trade Waste Environmental Management Plan be adopted? Moved by Councillor Chewy, seconded by Councillor Baines. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 3.14, Service Management Guideline and Service Management Guideline Policy.
So, councillors, one of the things that is changing, particularly in the Queensland local government environment, is we are going into areas where a lot of the councils are trying to move into the space of trying to understand what services do councillors deliver and what is the level of service and how much it's actually costing us to deliver some of these services. So the intent behind that is to then allow the community to make informed decisions, particularly and also help them understand the level of cost involved in running and providing some of these services. And what this document allows us to do is actually set the stepping stone for us going forward. And as you all are aware, as part of the budget process this year, we tried putting a services catalog just to help us all understand the different services and activities that council performs, and again trying to bring in a dollar figure next to them just to try and give the community and council and staff a better understanding of all that is involved with it. So in terms of the actual document that sits councillors, I'll just quickly run through the service management guidelines. So the intent here is it provides us a number of principles. So on page 162 and 163, councillors, so what is important for us is actually to understand the service planning principles. So when we start looking at the principles, so we want to make sure that our service planning framework aims to achieve the following. The first one is outcome-focused services. So we want to make sure that our services are strategically aligned to council's strategic objectives and also have a clear and measurable outcome, so we can start measuring ourselves, and also going forward when we start working on our corporate plans, we just have to make sure that they are aligned. We are responsive and accessible. We are responsive and have accessible services. So again, just to make sure that current and future needs and the perceptions of value are being met, and also that we are not duplicating services that are being provided by other services or agencies, and we're trying to make sure that we provide the best value role to ensure the community expectations are being responded to. Also, sustainable services. So council will regularly review its services to ensure it remains financially sustainable, and consideration will be given to environmental factors, technological advancements, waste elimination, duplication, underpinned by council's value and focus on continuous improvement. So what's important for us, it has been for the last couple of years especially, is continuous improvement. So one of the things we've tried doing is looking at every opportunity whereby we can find some savings or better ways of doing things, and part of that is to then pass on that savings back onto the ratepayers. So this service planning principle will actually reinforce that for us. And then the next item talks about evidence-driven services. So again, we are going to make sure going forward we are effective and efficient in the manner in which the community considers to represent, for the services to represent value to them. And also we will not commit to new services or make changes to services without effective service planning that considers council's broader delivery context, capability and capacity, as well as the impact on the community. So for example, if we are going out and building a new, say, swimming pool, then we need to understand the impact of that and the flow-on cost implications. So again, the perfect example is the lovely Mission Beach aquatic facility. We all enjoyed. My kids love spending time there, but I think part of this is we also need to acknowledge that there is a cost factor involved with it. And we're not discouraging building those facilities, but I think what we need to understand as a community that when we build these, there's a cost involved. So which means there will be rate rises. And if the community wants us to provide these lovely facilities, then we will have to increase the rates to make sure we are able to run these facilities properly. So again, we're not discouraging that, but I think what I'm trying to do here is use an example whereby we need to understand the link between investing in infrastructure and the cost involved with it, and starting to understand the whole of life costing. Item 2.5, appropriately resource services. So again, council will commit to providing the appropriate resources required to meet agreed service levels determined during service planning. And again, trying to make sure that we ensure that the largest possible benefit for the community and also minimize any long-term financial burdens. And the last one, again, sustainable assets that support services. So going forward, we need to make sure that we commit to responsible service planning. And this is where it's important for us to make sure going forward we continue to review our asset management plans and other strategies that council has. So I'll just draw your attention to Appendix B. So the Appendix B, going forward, what we'll have is a services catalog, and the services catalog will include a list of the different service types that we have, who the service owner is and the provider is, what are the levels of services that are being provided, and then also how do we measure some of these services and the cost of some of these, and then also just trying to make sure that a lot of these services are aligned to our corporate plans, operational plans, and we're starting to move into the space of customer experience and trying to improve our customer services that we provide, and then also starting to step into service agreements. So again, this is going to be a 3 to 4 year journey. So what we're doing as part of this particular budget is pretty much laying the stepping stone for us, which would be through the guideline itself, and the staff will benefit from that. So councillors, just a recommendation for today is actually to adopt the service management guideline.
Councillors, any questions for Mr Singh? I'll take that as a no. It's moved by Councillor Millwood, seconded by Councillor Chewy. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We move on to item 3.15, the Asset Rationalisation Report.
So, councillors, when we talk about assets, again, the gross value of our asset base, around $1.8 billion, which is a big number on our balance sheet. When we look at our percentage that comes out through depreciation, it's around 32-33%, depending on when we're looking at it. And when we start looking at that, that is pretty much the same as our employee expenses and our materials and services and the level of spend that goes into that. What we have identified, so when we look at the number of ratepayers in the community, and when we look at the dollar figure and start comparing the value of assets that we own versus the number of rateable properties we have. So for example, us in the 2018-19 financial year, when we did our comparative then, for every rateable property, we had around $73,000 worth of assets. We own them. When we look at the likes of Tablelands and Hinchinbrook, theirs varies between $42,000 to $46,000. So again, you can see clearly for us, we have a fairly massive asset base. The challenge for council is how can we rationalize and manage our asset base. So one of the things that obviously this council had an appetite for, in which we were quite happy to have you guys on board in that aspect, whereby we can work with you guys to then move forward. And as part of the budget process this year, to assist with ensuring that our rate increases are minimal, and we are looking at opportunities of rationalizing where we have assets that are not used to volume, or where we can do pooling and economies of scale by moving into one sort of facility rather than using 4 or 5 different facilities. So as a budget target, and again working through the councillors, I think what we have done is we have factored in to the budget process around $400,000 worth of savings through depreciation reduction, and the intent that we will identify a list of assets that we'll go through, and with the help of the community reference group, we'll try and see how we can sort of manage some of these assets. Councillor Farinelli, through the chair.
Councillor Farinelli.
I just want to assure the community that while this is a big thing for me, making sure this actually we follow through with this, as this council made that clear from day one, that we will not be sending in any wrecking balls or demolition. Everything will be done through community consultation. I'll be chairing the community reference group, so it's my intention to make sure that the community comes along with us on this, but while also fully informing them of the benefits of us actually carrying this out to them in the future, because we all want new pretty things, but those new pretty things cost. And until we start removing some of these stranded assets and underutilised assets, to continue building new things is just going to have a negative impact on the ratepayer. So this is fantastic that this is happening. It's going to be a lot of hard work, but just to assure the community, we're doing this, with all the best intentions and with their involvement.
Thank you, Councillor Farinelli. Any further comments, councillors? I'd like to concur with what Councillor Farinelli's stated. 2015, Queensland Treasury Corporation told Cassowary Coast Regional Council your asset base versus your ratepayer base is out of whack, and it is unsustainable. There's a lot of challenges going forward. It's going to take political will, and there will be some political pain. But the challenge over the next 3 years, no doubt, will be that we retire stranded assets. We've got to do it. The appetite in the community is measured by the fact that last year we closed a swimming pool. There was no backlash. We also took Perry Harvey Jetty off our depreciation list. No backlash. So the appetite of the community is there. They understand that our asset base, when compared to our neighbouring shires, is double. It's a clear path that we have to take, and those seeking re-election in 4 years' time, I'm sure if we deliver on this asset rationalisation approach, strategy, there's going to be a lot of fruit to be borne because we do have plenty of stranded assets. Our staff have done a great job identifying them. It's simply a matter now of Councillor Farinelli taking it to the community via the community reference group. 26 ratepayers sit on that group, a broad cross-section of people, and they're going to advise us on what the community can go without going forward. And it's not going to be about rate increases in the future. It's going to be how we can trim that asset base and try to get down to the level of Hinchinbrook, $43,000, Tablelands, $46,000, and we're sitting at $74,000 asset value per rateable property. Unsustainable. And when you've got Treasury telling you you've gone off course with your policy direction, we've got to listen. So we'll be behind you 100%, Councillor Farinelli, when you endeavour to identify the low-hanging fruit in terms of our assets, stuff that's stranded, bring it back to the table here and you'll get the full support of 6 fellow councillors, I can assure you of that. And we all know that our staff have prepared the document. It's just a matter now of the political will to cut the fat. That's our challenge for the next 3 years. Any further questions from the floor? Moved by Councillor Farinelli, seconded by Councillor Millwood. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We move on to item 3.16, the Code of Competitive Conduct.
So, just on that, councillor. So the Code of Competitive Conduct, council is required to decide each year if it will apply the Code of Competitive Conduct to their business activities for the following year or not. This is something that is in the regulations, and the way the regulations are designed, there's a threshold table that we look at. So on page 169, particularly for the water and the sewerage business, so the threshold that we look at is the number of premises 10,000 or more connected to a water service as at 30th June of each financial year, and for any other business activity it's around $9.7 million. So when applying the code, we apply full cost pricing and also identify the cost of community service obligations and the elimination of the advantages and disadvantages of public ownership within that activity. So just drawing on from there, so the full cost pricing actually helps to ensure that we as an organisation are able to charge commercially and competitive prices for the goods and services that we deliver. And then when we look at table on page 170, so water and sewerage had a connection of around 13,128. The threshold is 10,000, so we obviously meet and exceed that threshold. In terms of our other business unit, which is waste, we are slightly below the threshold of 9.7 million. So councillors, just in terms of the figures, so just going on to the statement itself, which is on page 173. So you can see for water and sewerage, we raised roughly around $22 million in revenue, which includes the community service obligations of around $590,000, expenditure of around $19.5 million, and the estimated surplus that we pick from water and sewerage is around $2.4 million, which helps to subsidize our general rates in other areas of the organisation. On page 174, there is a breakdown of our community service obligations. This is mainly around call out and inspections of water leaks that are not charged, and also concession for water consumption, And again, we have call out for sewerage and also additional pedestal charge in this particular budget. I think we have factored in around $200,000 worth of initiatives or concessions, and sewerage concessions for the not-for-profit organisation roughly equates to around $62,000. So in total, council does provide a CSO of around $590,000. So council, the recommendation in front of us is actually there's a minor tweak to the recommendation. So if we look at the page 7 of the recommendation, so that council note the changes made to the significant business threshold amount of water and sewage. It should be 10,000 or more premises and apply the code of conduct. And the second one is that council resolve not to apply the code of conduct. So the 10,000 needs a comma, and the second one, council resolves not to. There's a 2 missing. So if we can just factor that in, that's the recommendation, councillors.
Any questions for Mr Singh on that report? Would somebody please move that be adopted? Councillor Baines, seconded by Councillor Barnes. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Move on to item 3.17, the financial statements.
So, councillors, under the regulations, we are required to present our statement of financial position, our statement of cash flow, our changes in equity, and our income and expenditure, which is covered through Appendix A, B, and C, and D, which is on page 177 of the report. It starts from 177. What we are required to do is present the budget for next year plus the additional 2 years. So, councillors, in terms of the first Appendix A, which is on page 177, the financial position, which is our balance sheet, in terms of the overall numbers. So what you can see is we are forecasting for the end of this financial year around $42 million cash at the end of the year, but going forward we can see that that is sort of gradually dropping, and that's mainly a reflection of what we have in our capital budget at this point in time, which will be something that we will review. But from a financial point of view, our total current assets for next year around $47 million. Our asset base, this is the net figure, so $1.2 billion roughly. Liabilities again around $6.5 million. That figure does change depending on the end of financial year and where we are with some of the invoices and other provisions. In terms of employee provisions, this is their sick leave, annual leave, and long service leave, and all that sort of stuff that sits in there. So again, total liabilities of around $16.9 million. Net community assets of around $1.17 billion as part of Appendix A. And again, future years are based on assumptions, so similar figures going forward. Councils, on Appendix B, this is our statement of cash flow. So for this financial year, like I mentioned before, so we are forecasting a cash ending balance of $42 million, going into next year 35, and slightly reducing over the next 2 years after that. But this again, what we have done is we have taken a conservative approach, whereby what we have done is we have identified some of our capital projects, but with minimal external funding. The likelihood of us, based on historical trends, is we can pick up more than what we had sort of factored in the budget. So that's us being conservative. Again, going forward, I think as we look at the later years in the 10-year forecast, the cash flow position does improve, and we start to see it gradually go up. Changes in equity is linked to Appendix A, the balance sheet. Again, just a recognition of the net results. So I just wanted to draw your attention to Appendix D. So what happens is Appendix D has a link flowing on from the P&L. So if we look at Appendix A, what this is, it's our income and expenditure statement for the year. So for this coming year, what we are forecasting is, if I go through the top of the page where we have our general rates, so as it currently stands, our estimated actuals for this year sitting at $40.4 million. For next year, what we are forecasting is a reduction to $39 million. So what you'll see is that is mainly a reflection of us reducing the discount rate and then reducing the rate in the dollar, whereby what it's doing is actually reducing our general rates from $40 million to $39 million. But what we have factored in this particular budget is a modest increase of 1.23% in general rates, and that is after we've done all the valuation movements and the rating reference recommendations, and also adjusted for discounts. So that's why that figure is dipping. So if we are comparing to historical years, the figures get distorted, so the message may not be as clear. And if somebody is trying to do comparatives, it might not reflect the true picture, because there are other variables that I have mentioned before that are currently in play. In terms of separate charges, we are seeing a slight increase. In terms of water, again, a slight increase based on our estimated actuals. Sewage, there is a slight reduction. The reduction reflects our COVID-19 package. And in terms of waste, there is a slight reduction as well. So overall, what we are looking at is a reduction of around $1.3 million in our total rates and utility charges. But that has been offset by also a reduction in our pensioner, in our discount figures. So that's the reduction from 15% to 10%. So just to give a bit of clarity, so what it demonstrates is the impact of the COVID-19 relief package, the impact of the valuations, the impact of the general rate discounts, the impact of the rating reference group, plus the council cost index increase for some of these charges, including a general rate increase of 1.23%. Overall impact, when you look at it, is the net rates and utility charges actually increased from $66 million to $66.6 million. So there is only an increase of $600,000. So when we do comparatives, what's important is that because we have 22 different rating categories, the flow-on effect to each of those rating category will be very different. So some people might see an increase of 1.5% in their rates for next year. Some people might see a slightly higher figure. And the other thing that distorts the figure will be is people who have sewage connections. So anyone who has sewage connections won't see any increase. And then there's others that don't have sewage connections. So again, there'll be a fairly different impact to different individuals. But when we present the budget, we look at it as a collective figure. And the collective figure will see an increase from 66 million to around 66.6 million. So I just wanted to draw to everyone's attention. So just be mindful there are a number of variables, and normally it's not as complicated as this year is because of the other additional challenges. So council, just from there on, in terms of the other revenue, so we have seen a slight reduction in our fees and charges, again, impact of COVID. Our sales and contracts, pretty much similar figure to this year. In terms of our grants and subsidies, there's a slight increase. A lot of that's to do with our financial assistance grant. Our interest revenue, we are forecasting a reduction in that space as well. Rental income, slight increase, and other income is dropping significantly. So overall, when we look at it, where we are, after passing on all these cost indexes and also adjusting for the other factors, what we can see is our revenue is actually only going up by around $50,000 or less. So that's the challenge that this council has had to deal with, whereby our inability to increase our revenue because of the situation we are. So one of the things we have then gone is we have gone harder on our expenses. So when we go to our capital revenue, we have sort of seen the same sort of level of figures. And one of the things that I've mentioned before at the bottom of that particular page on page 80 was, when I say we have been conservative, what we are saying is for next year, we are forecasting a capital revenue of around $11 million. But when you look at the future years, what we're saying is we're only going to get 1.4 million and 3.1 million. The likelihood of us picking those numbers would be higher, but we have been mindful that we don't want to create unnecessary expectations, especially when we start forecasting, and that's a more realistic figure to go with. And in terms of the expenditure, so I just wanted to flag, so in terms of employee expenses, 26 million was the figure or estimated figure for this particular year. Budgeted figure was higher than $26 million. What we have seen is a reduction in our budgeted figure when we compare the budget figure for this year versus next year. Again, part of that is a reflection on where we have made some structural alignments to make sure we don't see a major increase in that figure. In terms of materials and services, we have seen a reduction in that figure from $29.7 million to $29.4 million. And depreciation, as you can see, has reduced from 26.7 million to 26.3, and that's where we have factored in that $400,000 worth of initiatives. So overall, when we look at our budget for next year, it has reduced when you compare to our estimated actuals for this year. So there has been a reduction in that space. So council, so when we look at the net results, so overall, the net result, which is both our operational and capital revenue versus our operational expenses and capital expenditure, we are forecasting a net result of $9 million of surplus, which is a reflection of our capital funding that are coming in to help with some of the capital projects. But in terms of the operational result, which is what we get measured on, what we are forecasting is a $9,000 surplus, which is a small surplus, so pretty much delivering a balanced budget. And then councillors, just going forward, we have made some assumptions around future expenditure where we have used CPI and council cost index as a guide. And in the future years, we are forecasting small surpluses and mainly balanced budget, especially for the next 2 years, with the view that we'll continue to pick up savings, particularly through asset rationalization, which has a flow-on effect to insurance, materials and services, and we have also continued to invest in energy renewables and other projects that we think will help to bring some operational savings. So councillors, just on that, so that sort of covers Appendix A, B, C and D. Is there any specific question on any of the appendices?
Councillors, any questions for Mr. Singh? No? Okay. Would somebody move that the financial statements be adopted, please? Moved by Councillor Millwood, seconded by Councillor Barnes. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Move on to item 3.18, the budget.
So councillors, just moving on, just in terms of the actual budget, so now we are moving into where we have identified or dissected the budget by different programs, just to give the council and the community a better picture in terms of where we're spending some of those dollars. Just be mindful of what we have done in terms of presenting the budget by programs or by department. We have made an assumption that the restructure that we had discussed earlier is something that we will adopt, and based on that, what you are seeing is actually a breakdown of the budget by the anticipated departments, which is the CEO's area, the delivery services and infrastructure services. So there is no planning and regional development. So that sort of reflects the changes. I will also highlight, so in terms of the numbers for some of those areas, what you are seeing, the total figure in that particular appendix is sitting at $97 million. What it includes is all our internal charges. When I say internal charges, this is the likes of fleet charging for the use of all their plant and equipment across the different business units, and also the corporate overheads that are then being charged to the different business units as well. So that's why the figure is slightly different, and that allows us to capture the full cost pricing. So councils, I won't run through Appendix E and F. I'll go through onto page 185, councillors. So on page 185, we have in front of us our capital budget. In the table on page 185, as you can see, the capital budget for next financial year, new capital, sitting at $36.6 million, and what we have in that particular budget is a substantial sum of disaster recovery funding that is sitting in the transport space. So as you can see, probably around $8.4 million worth of disaster recovery funding, which will continue, or which will assist us to continue with our renewal of our roads and other infrastructure in that particular space, particularly the transport infrastructure. So from a anticipated carryover point of view, we are anticipating a carryover of $19.9 million to then go in with an anticipated total capital budget of $56 million. Councillors, just be mindful that the capital carryover figures may vary. It's just an estimate that we had done at a point in time. And depending on where the team has been in May and June, we may have been able to accelerate, or it could have been vice versa, so that there's a likelihood that figure may change. And we normally review that figure in the September budget figure. The other thing that I wanted to highlight, though, is, councillors, we, as part of the budget process, because of the challenges between the timing and when the Walks for Queensland, particularly the COVID-19 package was announced, we were still in the process of finalising our project list. I know Council had finalised the project list and we had passed it on, but we hadn't been able to get the approval from the department to go, yep, we are happy with those projects. So what we have done is we have actually left those projects out. And I am mindful of the fact there's a number of initiatives and some good projects that sit in that space. But what we'll do is when we do our September budget review, we'll bring those projects back in. So that's the plan at this stage. In terms of Appendix H, councillors, so that sort of highlights some of the key projects. Without going through all of those, we continue to invest in our swimming pools. There is a program for that. We have our normal facilities renewal programs. We continue to commit to our Mission Beach CBD master plan. There has been some funding allocated, and we will be lobbying with the state and the feds to see if we can pick up some external funding for that. In terms of our continued investment in IT, that continues, and the challenges of Tech One. In terms of some of the other areas, again, continued investment in marine facilities, continued investment in fleet, our continued investment in our recreational and natural areas. We have allocated some funding for the Innisfail CBD master plan again, so ongoing commitment to the master plan that we had agreed to. Continued investment in our sewage program, particularly our relining programs, and upgrade to our Tally sewage treatment plant has been factored in the budget as well. Regional reseals, continued commitment to that, $1 million in that. Seal road renewals, $1 million for that. Unsealed road renewals, around $1.1 million. Councillors, just in the past, we have had a program of our unsealed road renewals of around $2.5 million. So that figure has been reduced to 1.1. But what we are acknowledging is, in this particular budget, is the additional funding of around $9 million that has come through the DRFA funding. So the actual investment in transport is going to be way more than what we have done over the last couple of years. So particularly that's where we made a decision to create $1 million or allocate $1 million to the reseal program. So just to make sure in our commitment to continued investment in our roads. And also one of the couple of other projects, I think one of the key ones here is Jacob Roads. So road widening at Jacob Roads in Elorish, and Caramite, sorry, my bad, and Ballyold Street, and also ongoing investment in our waste facilities and councillors. In terms of water, around $5 million allocated to water. I just wanted to draw to your attention on page 189, project ID 463. We have allocated around $700,000 worth of money to the Hyde Street supply mains for the new reservoir that has been planned over the next couple of years. So there is a correction in the details, so the details should reflect actually the title. So it is for the supply for Hyde Street mains, not the chlorine injection as it currently states. So that's a minor change to that. And again, finalization of our Bulgan Creek reservoir intake, and continued investment in our smart meters to manage our water security issues and water leakage and mitigation. And councillors, Appendix I, without going through Appendix I in detail, so this is again our continued commitment to ensure that we are planning for at least 3 years. And Appendix I is our capital projects that we have identified for the next 2 years after that, just to provide councillors guidance and also allow us to plan going forward. So councillors, in terms of future investments, so we are looking at investing around $30.7 million in 2021, which is at the bottom of page 194, and around $32 million, which is for the 22-23 year. So that's something that we have started last year, and the intent is to make sure going forward we have pre-populated projects, and from a community point of view, we can then demonstrate to the community which projects are in the pipeline, so we can start informing the community on what council intends to do going forward. So just in terms of Appendix J, councillors, so Appendix J again is our statement of comprehensive income. Under the legislations, we are required to plan for 10 years, and as you can see, we have included in the appendix our income breakdown of our income through different revenue streams, and also our total revenue figure on page 196. The challenge we have as council, so going forward, obviously, is our continued reliance on rates and utility charges. So the challenge again for us as council and for staff in the community is to then see how we can reduce our reliance on general rates and look at other revenue funding stream. And one of the things we will start doing is actually start moving into an area where we'll start pursuing more external works to see if we can start making more money out of that, to then bring in other income streams for the organization. In terms of expenditure, councillors, so I just wanted to flag that for this particular budget we have committed to our EBA award for our employees, so council has committed to that, so we haven't made any changes around that. Moving forward in the longer term, again, we are committing to our EBA increases that has been committed to. With the capital investment that we are doing for this year, what it has or it can allow council to do going forward is actually put more people on, particularly doing capital projects. So, and that is something that we are demonstrating in our 10-year capital project going forward, whereby our continued commitment, particularly in water and sewerage, where we see there's an opportunity for us to continue having more skilled people to help with deliver some of those critical water projects going forward. But in terms of the general markers that we have used for the long-term financial plan, councillors, again, our reliance has been on CPI and council cost index, and the data that comes in from our asset management plans actually helps us to forecast our depreciation figures. So the important thing for us is to continuously review and update our asset management plans. And one of the things that we have picked up in our long-term financial plans for this coming year is what we have seen is we are a bit less heavy going into the last 2 or 3 years of the asset management plans in terms of the dollars. So that is something that we'll have to work on, and that's reflected in this particular budget. So particularly, councillors, when we start looking at our cash flow, so just on page 201, when you get to our cash flow, so one of the things you will see is we start off with $42 million, we go to 35, and we gradually are dropping up to around June 25, where we get to $27 million roughly, and then as we hit 28, 29, and 30 financial year, our cash flow starts going up. So we start going in around $38 million, and then 41, and then 48. So what that starts indicating, and the reason for that is actually because of our lack of investment in our capital projects. So that's reflected when you look at the line above that, whereby when you look at the payments for property, plant, and equipment, as we go to June 28, 29, and 30, the dollar figures for our capital investment starts dropping down. So that's reflected in it. So again, that's something that I wouldn't be too concerned, but I think one of the things that indicates to us is the importance of continuously looking at our AMPs and making sure that we are happy with the projects and the dollars that are sitting in there, because that does have a flow-on effect to this. So councillors, in terms of the future years, future years, we are forecasting balanced budget, and also in terms of the key ratios. So just drawing your attention to page 202. On page 202, councillors, the measures of financial sustainability. So council gets measured on 3 measures. The first one is our operating surplus ratio. So the target range is between 0 to 10. And what we are forecasting for us is this figure will be 0% going forward. What it indicates is pretty much a balanced budget for us going forward into the future years. And then when we start looking at our net financial assets and liability ratios, what the target for this ratio is to be below 60%, where we are generally sitting at a negative 37% for next year. And what it indicates is we are in a healthy cash flow position whereby we've got enough money in our current assets to meet our current liability obligations, and which is a healthy sign. So going forward into the future years, again, we are meeting that. The challenge for us, though, councillors, are going into next year, what we're saying for the next ratio, which is our asset sustainability ratio, the target range for that is 90%. So literally what it means is that the level of depreciation that we incur, 90% of that depreciation needs to go back into existing assets, and continue to invest in current assets rather than building new assets. So the moment that percentage starts dropping, what it starts indicating to us is that we are building more new stuff. And as that happens, there's a flow-on effect whereby our cost of operation starts going up. So what the legislation and obviously the QAO and through the Queensland Treasury Corporations, they require and they keep a closer eye on this in terms of where council is when it comes to the 3 ratios. So going into next year, what we're saying is our asset renewal ratio is going to be 121%, which is a good figure. Going into June 22, we are going to sit at 99%. But there are some future years where we are dropping below 90%. And when we get towards the last 4 financial years in the 10-year forecast, we are below 80% for the last 2 years and close to 80% for the 2 years before that. So again, it's important to acknowledge it's a marker, but it doesn't mean that we're not doing the right thing. But every council will be at a different percentage. So if you look at the likes of, say, Brisbane, Gold Coast or Ipswich for that matter, their percentages will be lower. Their ability to meet their target will be always lower because they have a lot of growth. When growth happens, so your focus generally is in new and you are picking that revenue through more rates. The issue or the challenge is where if we are a council that is not growing and we continue to invest in new infrastructure, that's where the challenge is, because then the rateable properties are not increasing to the percentage of where our actual assets are increasing. So that's where the rate burden does increase. So potentially for someone like us, what is important is any new infrastructure that we build, it needs to be designed with the view that it will bring in more growth into the area. So that will then mitigate that challenge. And I think what council has done, which has been a very positive move, is through asset rationalisation though, we can counteract it, whereby if we are building new stuff, then we are also disposing of stuff that we don't need. So that brings in a bit of alignment. So councillors, that sort of sums up those appendices. Is there any question on any of that?
I'll move that the 2021 budget be adopted. Yeah, okay, Councillor Farnelli.
Okay. It's all great information, and I think for me, the majority of people at home, they look at the rate rise. That's all that they're really worried about. And it became very apparent in our workshops, our sessions that we had, how important it was that we deliver a great budget in this term. I'll just draw your memory back to, I think it was the 18th of May, where we had a council information session and we were talking about council's financial history. and we were talking about green lights and red lights, if you can remember that, Mr. Singh, and the importance of, and basically the issue around having 5 red lights in a row and how that impacts us if there's, was 4 red lights in a row. And I asked you what was our history with the red and green lights. And you'd said to me that we had 2 green lights, followed by 3 red lights, and heading up to a 4th red light. So I've done a little bit of research, and you explained to me the formula in determining these red and green lights: income revenue less expenses, excluding capital income and expenses. So I did the activity myself, which was very interesting. 30th of June 2015, Bill Shannon Council, we received a green light of $1.4 million. 30th of June 2016, we received a green light of $1.6 million. 30th of June 2017, a red light, $2.9 million. 30th of June 2018, another red light, $1.7 million. 30th of June 2019, a red light again, $1.96 million. And this budget that you've got here in this report, the previous mayor in his budget summary was proposing an $11,000 surplus, which resulted in a $580,000 red light. So there's our 4 red lights in a row, and this council had to be, from what I understand through the budget process, we had to really consider, we didn't want any more red lights, we were looking for green lights, and I think we've done a great job with this budget. I would have loved to delivered on a 0% rate rise, but COVID was a challenge, but even bigger challenge was making sure that we didn't get ourselves another red light moving forward, and I think our staff have done a great job in the circumstances. Let's hope that our $9,000 surplus stays as that. We've got a challenge ahead of us because, as I said, totally unacceptable, and unfortunately that's a history this council inherited. We have nothing that we can do about it.
Mr. Mayor, can I make a comment?
Yeah, Mr. Singh.
Just through the chair. Council, I think one of the things that is important to acknowledge though is with every number there is a story. And if we look at numbers in isolation, it doesn't tell the story. So if we go back to the first year when the previous team started, so one of the decisions that that particular council made was actually to write off the loans. And writing off the loans meant council knowingly went into that deficit figure, whereby if they would have not made the decision to go into a position whereby they would have agreed to write off the loans, they would have actually finished in a surplus figure. So I think what we need to acknowledge is that there are situations where we make decisions, and the decision at that point in time was for the benefit of the community going forward, that we pay off the loans. And I fully support the decision, and I think that was probably one of the best decisions that a council has made, particularly now when you look at the interest rates and where we are. Yes, that council went into a deficit figure, but there was a reason, and the reason was we paid off our loans. So I think we need to acknowledge it. Then, from there on, when we look at the years after, we have tried diversifying, we have tried doing a lot of different initiatives, and again, there has been some challenges around the wall rafting. We have had some challenges through the state government, the Hinchinbrook Resort, where we had to write off some debts. So again, as councillors, I think what is important is, in as community, what is important is, yes, we have a number on the table, but just be mindful that there are stories and stories behind each of those numbers. Going into, say, this budget, yes, we are committing to a small surplus of $9,000. The challenge will be sticking to it and making sure we don't have a story linked to it that affects us. And when we look at, say, the end of year forecast, what we're saying at this point in time, yes, we are forecasting a deficit of $500,000. The story behind it that people don't look at it is actually COVID-19. If you take away COVID-19, potentially the market situation would have been the same. And in that case, we would have continued picking up the revenue that we had anticipated. We would have done that. We would have actually been able to also reduce our cost, whereby a lot of the cost that we have incurred this year has been around enabling staff to work from home, enabling us to do a live telecast and all that. So it doesn't tell that story. So what's important is people, if they look at just that $500,000 deficit, then the story becomes, oh, council is not doing well because of the figure. But there is a story behind it. So going forward though, so I think the challenge for us is to make sure that we commit to the figures, and also what is important is that we acknowledge the history that yes, we have come from that. Yes, we have in those situations. The challenge we have as an organization is to turn this around to then go, how can we now start getting a few more green lights going forward? And one of the key things for that is to stick to one of the lovely documents that we discussed this morning, which was our operational plan. So if we stick to that, and without any major hiccups, that should allow us to come out on the other side with the green. And in addition to that, I think the other thing that is going to be important for us is in this particular budget, we have factored in not only $400,000 worth of depreciation savings, we have committed to a number of COVID-19 initiatives and potentially how that turns out and where we land, and the challenges that we have to deal, particularly from a community point of view, can have an impact on us. And we have also factored in around $275,000 worth of business efficiency savings, which is a target that we have set to the team internally. And that's something that we will try and achieve over the next couple of months. So, which requires not just a commitment from the staff, but also a commitment from the councillors and also the community. If we are looking for $675,000, and if we don't get to that, the $9,000 surplus will quickly change to a $703,000 or $700,000 deficit very quickly. So I think that's important. So,
thank you, Mr. Singh. Thanks, Councillor Farinelli, for that comment. I'll move the adoption of the 2021 budget. Do we have a seconder, please? Seconded by Councillor Baines. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll move on now to item 3.19, changes in rates and utility charges.
So, councillors, as part of the legislation, we are required to make sure that we calculate the movement between our total value of changes in rates and utilities. If I draw your attention to page 202, what we have on the table is our estimated total revenue for this financial year, which includes our general rates and utilities and charges, and it also includes our discount figure. So what we are anticipating at a gross figure is roughly around $72 million, and after taking off our discounts, we're looking at around $66 million. The budget that we had for this year, we had anticipated a total revenue of $71.9 million, and after taking the discounts, we were looking at, again, roughly around $66 million as a budgeted figure. What we're going in with the budget for next year, we are proposing a slight increase in general rate revenue, which is a gross figure, and also there has been an increase slightly compared to the budget figure for utility charges. So overall, in the scheme of things, we are looking at around $70.6 million as the total gross rates and utility charges, which excludes the discount figure. And then underneath that, there is a discount of $4 million that we have factored in. So, councils, for comparative purposes, what normally happens is we normally just compare the gross figure. So if council compares the gross figure, and if we compare that gross figure to last year's numbers, which is our estimated figures, the total change is a negative 1.9%. And if we compare it versus our budget figure, then the total change is negative 1.8%. So when you look at what we are raising out of our rates and utility charges, there has been actually a reduction in what we are raising this year. Again, it doesn't tell the full story, and the reason being that figure is actually because we have adjusted for the discounts. So we have adjusted for the 5% discount, and that is distorting the numbers. And that is why I would like to reinforce or maybe highlight again the general rate increase that we have worked on through our modelling after making all the adjustments is around 1.23%. And then the water and other charges are going to increase by cost indexes. And then people will actually then benefit from the COVID package that has come through, whereby some of those numbers will get affected. So when we look at the negative figure, that doesn't, again, tell the story, if I am to say. And then also when we look at the discount figure, which probably gives the net figure underneath, probably gives us a better picture, because then we have adjusted for the discount, which is now, what it does then indicate to us is then the actual total net rates and utility charges have actually gone up by 0.85% roughly. So that's what the average is across the board. So I think that's the important bit. So again, as a council, I probably wouldn't focus too much on the top figure because of the challenges of us adjusting some numbers. But at the bottom line, the better figure to use would be there is an increase of 0.85%. But again, just be mindful that is based on totality, not just looking at individual rating categories. So that's the average across the board. So that's the important bit.
With your permission, Mr. Chairman, if I could just draw the councillors right back to the beginning of the document at page 7 of 217 at item 19. The recommendation is that council notes the total value of the change in rates and utility charges levied in 2020-2021 compared with the previous budget, parentheses, excluding discounts and rebates, end parentheses, is negative 1.8%, and draw your attention very specifically to the next words, which say, and 0.85% using net rate and utility charges levied as outlined in the appendix, which was referred to by Mr. Singh a moment ago. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Are you complete with your report?
I was just going to, Council, so that's the last recommendation, but before we go into that final recommendation, I just wanted to draw your attention to something that we have done on page 204, something different we've done this year through the management accounting team. Obviously, what we have tried doing is providing the community a bit more information around what are the numbers for our annual budget, what does the statement of income and expenditure mean, and also the other key ratios. We have covered some of the budget assumptions and also how we work out some of the numbers, just to give them a bit of idea. If someone doesn't like reading numbers, then they can read a bit of that. And then also in terms of our operating position, we have tried demonstrating through our graphs how the scale looks. And the one that I wanted to draw to your attention was on that page we have mentioned we do normally factor in some growth, but for us the growth that we factor in is very minimal. So I think for the future years we've just factored in very minimal growth increases in the region, and a lot of the increases in rates will be more than the CPI. But on page 207, so just to give the community a bit of a glimpse going forward, so in terms of when we start talking services catalogue, that particular graph demonstrates where and how much we spent as a community on some of the key services. So when people do ask, so where does my roads levy go? So I just wanted to draw your attention on page 207, if you look at roads, including operational and capital budget, we are probably going to spend around $29 million next year is what we intend to spend. If we look at the operational budget, we are going to spend roughly around $15 million. So that's where the importance of the road levy allows us to spend a bit of money, or a lot of that money in that space. Same way when we look at water, so the next bigger tick item for us is water, and then we are looking at spending around close to $16 million on water, which is both OPEX and CAPEX, and then followed through by sewage, which is around a little bit more than $10 million, and then waste and other resource is after that. So you can see after roads, we have our business units is where we spend a fair bit of money. But this is all designed to assist the community going forward, so they can start understanding where council spends and how much council spends on some of these. But just be mindful, the capital expenditure figures used in this are purely just new capital figures, not carryovers. If we use carryover figures, then it will actually make the graphs and the numbers bigger. So that's that particular page. And councillors, just the other pages after that, 208, it demonstrates our reliance on rates. So 81% of our revenue actually comes from rates. That's how heavily dependent we are on rates, and that was why I mentioned before that we need to diversify a bit more and reduce our reliance on rates. And then also in terms of operating expenditure, in this particular budget, depreciation is around 32%, materials and services around 36%, and employee expenses around 32%. And then flowing on from there, another visual demonstration of our capital graphs and our net results. And councillors, page 210, a simplified version of our capital forecast. And as I mentioned earlier, when we were looking at the QDC numbers, when you look at the last 3 years, we are sort of a bit lower than the previous first 6 years. So that's something that we need to continue to improve on. And then from there on, our statement of cash flows and other statements. And then on page 212, our ratios, and it explains what are some of our ratios. And then follow through, councillors, just in terms of rates revenue. If we continue to follow the path that we are following, and if we don't look for initiatives or innovative ways of reducing our cost, what we have factored in the model going forward is potentially around between 2% to 2.75% rate increases going forward. So that's based on CPI and also our slight population growth. So that's the challenge. So in terms of us, how can we continue to moderate that figure? And we have been able to moderate that figure, as you can see, demonstrated by the table underneath, which is on page 214. Particularly in the last 5 years, council has tried keeping the rate increases below CPI, and the challenge is to continue that. But I think we are getting in the space where if we don't make or continue to make tough decisions, at some point there might be a spike that might take us back to above 2% or 2.5%. So let's just be mindful of it. And then just to help the members of the community better understand what would be the impact on some of them. So on page 215, we have dissected the rate movement by specific locations, just to give everyone a bit of idea around what the numbers would look like. So if I look at, say for example, Innisfail, last year was less than 75%, the first table. The gross amount was around 3789. Because of the discount changes, the gross amount now reduces to 3779. So that's a reduction of roughly around $10. And that's what I was saying, where for members in the community who don't take advantage of the discounts, they actually will pay, in most cases, less than what they had paid in the past. So that's the beauty of adjusting the discounts from 15% to 10%. But then on the other hand, there would be some members in the community that might go, by the way, we are the ones that are paying more now. But that's the challenge we have, because we look at rates across the 22 rating categories, not just one, and that allows, or that makes it quite difficult to moderate and give the same outcome or achieve the same outcome for everyone. But that actually demonstrates the changes and the movements, and that allows us to be more transparent so that people can actually understand. And then the last page on 217 are some of the key things that has been considered. So again, highlighting the valuation movements, the rating reference recommendations, mainly the 15 to 10% reduction in discounts, single water pricing for the schemes across, no changes to sewerage, modest increase in waste and environmental and transport levies, and the impact of COVID-19 on the budget. So when we say impact of COVID-19, I think what is important is also to acknowledge that we're not only talking about the $400,000, that is a relief package, but I think what we need to be mindful of is also the financial impact of COVID-19 on council, and we have lost a fair bit of revenue for next year, which is where we have to balance that off. So that's the challenge. So the actual impact of COVID-19 is not 400, it actually is way more than, at least more than $1 million is what I would say, in terms of impact on revenue and expenditure. So that pretty much sums it for us, Mr. Mayor.
Any questions, councillor, for Mr. Singh? not, would somebody move that the recommendation that we note the changes in rates and utility charges be adopted? Moved by Councillor Chewy, seconded by Councillor Millwood. All in favour? Carried unanimously. That brings us to the close of the meeting. But before I do close, I'd like to go around the table and offer councillors an opportunity to express a few words of appreciation. Councillor Millwood.
Through the Chair, in adopting this budget, I've had a steep learning curve in local government, learnt the crucial lessons in how to contribute vital information required to help to deliver the budget. And I'd just like to say great thanks to the finance team who is heavily relied upon during this with Councillor Farinelli's sharp razor. I've learnt so much about the budget and now realise that the budget and council on a whole is so much more than roads, rubbish and rates. And for us to be sustainable, we need to be very robust with our decisions in order to minimise the decisions that happens in our rates. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Millwood. Any further comments, councillors? Councillor Farinelli.
I just want to acknowledge the new councillors. I think they've done an incredible job to still be sitting here around the table after what we've been through. It's been the toughest budget, and I just want to acknowledge the new councillors and the great job that they've done and the contributions they've made to our sessions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Farinelli. Any further comments, councillors? Councillor Chewy. Councillor Purban.
I'd like to thank all the staff and fellow councillors for this opportunity to set our first budget as a 2020 council. It basically gave me a new understanding of how things work, and yeah, it's a real learning curve, and I'm looking forward to the years to go ahead.
Thanks, Councillor Purban. Councillor Chewy. No. Councillor Baines.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like again to thank all the staff, thank all the councillors. It's been a great budget process. I know it's quite full on straight after an election, go into a budget process. Then they decided to throw in lockdowns at us at the same time. But the work's done in previous councils and in this council will continue going forward in a positive manner, and I look forward to that process.
Thanks, Councillor Baines. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to support all the previous speakers. I thought we've had some good comments here today, and supporting such a great budget. I think what's come to the front is what COVID has taught us is the reliance that has come to the front. We've got business and tourism has really taken a hard hit. I know 28% of our rates come from rural, but there's a lot of people who think out there that it's the one and only, and I think we've learned a lot out of this. I think even as a council, it was amazing to see our expenses rise so quickly in jobs through social distancing, working at homes, and I thought the staff managed it exceptionally well. I think as a council and finance staff, we've done such a great job. It would have been quite easily just to go and borrow a heap more money like our northern neighbours. They borrowed a lot to try and stimulate the economy, but I think we've done it throughout borrowing and good management. And it's great to see the graph which we saw earlier in the meeting, where this is our lowest increase in the last 12 years, as our Mayor stated. Now, this is a hard show to run because some councils only have one town, one library, one swimming pool. We have 4 towns, 4 swimming pools, 4 libraries, and which I don't have to tell. So overall, I think it's been a great budget, and I'd just like to congratulate everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Councillor Chewy.
I will follow on. Once again, I would like to concur with all my fellow councillors. I appreciate the effort that they've all put in, experienced and new. It's been a learning curve for all of us. Thank you to Mr Singh and his team, and I still hold my fascination for people who love numbers. I mean, without them, we wouldn't be where we are today. So thank you all very much for all your efforts. Thank you.
Well said, Councillor Chewy. I'll wrap it up. This is my 16th local government budget, by far the toughest for a number of reasons. Shortly after being sworn in, we were confronted with an organisational review, and there were recommendations within that review for savings. And I want to thank the councillors who adopted that recommendation, saved $1 million, certainly took a lot of pressure off this current budget. Not only did that occur, but fellow councillors willingly, passionately voted down the 2% pay rise. Now, some people in the community belittle that decision, but they don't understand the knock-on effect. Senior management who report to the CEO immediately lined up and said, we're going to follow the lead of the elected representatives and we're going to forego any pay rise that could come our way as well. So the savings haven't been calculated at this moment, but without doubt, that's been a huge leadership role that our staff have taken to support the councillors who said no to the 2% pay rise. On top of that, we had catering costs put in front of us, and unanimously the councillors voted to BYO. No more catering paid for by the ratepayers, a $60,000 saving. Some will sneer at that as well, but I believe that's a significant example of the leadership of the 7 councillors. We went into asset rationalisation, a new part of our machinery in terms of trying to find savings, and our staff did a great job in presenting low-hanging fruit. We delivered $400,000 savings in depreciation. We still are very generous in a tight budget, $700,000 to the pensioner discount. One of the real shining lights, a green light, if I can put that overtone to it, 9 unqualified audits. This council has now attracted 9 unqualified audits. That is significant. When your internal and external auditors tell you that you've gone off track with your policy direction and your spending, you get qualified audits. We haven't had one for 9 years. And on top of all that, we get a $9,000 surplus. So I think it's an outstanding result when you put it all into context, dealing with COVID-19 and the $400,000 hardship package that we've delivered in this budget. And I also want to put on public record the support of the Queensland Government. Where would this council be, and the previous council, without Work for Queensland funding? It takes a huge amount of pressure off our budget. We're not using ratepayers' money, it's state money. The LNP have indicated in chats that the CEO I've had with them that if they're elected to power in October, they will continue Work for Queensland, maybe under a different label, which is how change of governments occur, but the connection to external funding through Work for Queensland and the Queensland Government, whichever colour of party is in there, that's going to continue, and that takes a lot of pressure off. And one other proud moment for me, in 2008 we amalgamated. We had 2 water charging methods. There was a unit-based charge in the Carball Shire, and we had a 2-part tariff in the north. And there was a lot of fear and trepidation by some councillors to bring the 2 charges together. Well, this year, 13 budgets in the Cassowary Coast Regional Council, we've delivered on parity. We now have no more north, no more south, it's all the same charge. I think that's an outstanding result, and I thank our staff, Mr Goodman, who managed that process. There was political pain, particularly for the southern part of the Shire. The Carball Shire, if you like, have borne a lot of the pain because the unit-based charge that they were under has now come into one, joining with the north, and that's been an outstanding result. Asset management plans are now in place thanks to our engineering staff and our finance department, and we can fine-tune our depreciation. Mr Singh has highlighted what a threat that is to us, around 26.8 million we've got to find each budget. That can be brought down through the process of asset rationalisation. That's got to be our target for the next 3 years and the next 3 budgets. So in closing, I just want to thank all the staff for an outstanding effort. We were sitting in our homes and our offices waiting for the count, and you people were doing the tough yards, crunching the numbers, preparing the budget. Really, this budget is your budget. We've adopted it on your behalf because all the hard work was done by our staff. We hardly had time to put our feet under the table. Yeah, we had a few workshops, but in general, you drafted the budget. We've adopted it unanimously. I think that's a reflection of the respect that we have in our staff across the board. It's white collar and blue collar. So with those few words, I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much.